One pain point has really been infrastructure. Saloni is back with us to tell us about the much talked about infra bonds. Saloni, the government and the RBI have really been putting their heads together on how to get, solve this big infrastructure problem for banks and the sector itself. But the data that you've collected seems to suggest that the infra bonds that were so talked about have really been a no-show.
Well, they were, launched in a very big way, and in fact, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley had first announced this last year on 10th of July. That was the budget, but post which, for the remaining part of FY15, we haven't seen a lot of demand when it comes to infra bonds. At the end of FY15, around 7 banks have raised upwards of 15,000 crore from infra bonds, and that includes only one PSU bank, which is Andhra Bank, which has raised about 200 crore, and remember, it had a board approval to raise about 800 crore from infra bonds. As far as private sector banks are concerned, Axis Bank and ICICI Bank have been the most interested as far as infra bonds are concerned. Axis Bank has raised somewhere about 5,700 crore. ICICI Bank has raised about 4,500 crore. HDFC Bank has raised about 3,000 crore, but clearly 7 banks have raised 15,000 odd crore. When I speak to bankers, they give 3 main reasons as far as the no-show for infra bonds is concerned. One being that there is low appetite among pension funds and insurance company when it comes to long-term raising of money. Also, there is very slow pickup when it comes to credit demand, and which is why banks don't want to go ahead and raise money via infra bonds. And of course, we are awaiting the credit policy on June 2, and there is anticipation in the market that RBI will go ahead and cut rates again, and which is why banks don't want to raise infra bonds at this point of time. And even if we look at the estimate for FY15, ICRA had estimated about upwards of 2.7 lakh crore being raised from infra bonds, and if you look at the 6-year period, the estimation was anywhere between 29 to upwards of the 30 lakh crore, which of course hasn't worked for infra bonds. So clearly, RBI and government have to put their heads together to see what is the primary reason why this mode of fundraising is not working out.
All right, so now stay with us. We're also being joined by Abhishek Bhattacharya, Associate Director Banks at India Ratings. Abhishek, why have infra bonds been not as exciting as one would have anticipated when the announcement was made? A lot of bankers showed a lot of interest, but what's really gone wrong?
I think calling it a no-show is a little harsh. I mean, of course, response has been slightly lukewarm. But our numbers would be about, I think 10 banks would have raised about 22,000 crores. And in addition to the public sector name you mentioned, I think even IDBI and Punjab National Bank have issued sizable amounts. So I think all put together about 6,000-7,000 crores have been issued by public sector banks. But having said that, I think, yes, some of the reasons, as mentioned earlier, are some of these banks are waiting for the rate cuts to happen. There is a high likelihood that there could be an impending rate cut. So since these come with a 7-year tenor, so I mean, very naturally banks would like to lock in at a better rate. The other thing also you have to look at it is comparing directly with the eligibility amount of say 3.5 lakh crore won't give you the full picture. I mean, if you look just at the banks which are running these huge ALM gaps, that would be a lower quantum, maybe 30-40% of that. So the requirement would stay, and we do believe it will pick up. I mean, even in this year we estimate a slightly higher number, but I think the point here is the start has been slightly tepid, but we expect that next year a higher quantum could come.
But we have to Abhishek, picking from the point that you just mentioned about some of these other banks, a lot of banks at the end of December last year had got board approval, which included a lot of banks that you mentioned as well. Andhra Bank, of course, was supposed to raise about 800 odd crores, and then it ended up raising 200 odd. So going forward in FY16 and post which, because there are a lot of estimates over the course of the next 6 years which estimate a very big number of upwards of 25 lakh crore of money being raised from these long-term bonds. Do you think something like this will materialize?
See, you have to also look at the fact that infra bond are not the only asset class right now vying for investor attention. There is 81 bonds, there are Basel 3 compliant tier 2 bonds. I mean, last year I think between 81 and Basel 3 tier 2 a similar quantum was raised, about I think 200 odd billion. So clearly while we would say that investor interest has been more in infra compared to these, given that there is I think a higher element of security, there is no element of loss absorption on a going concern basis in these bonds. But of course you have to there are a few things which are at play. One is rates firmed up slightly I think since December, and so many of the banks I think took a seat back and were waiting for these rate cuts to come before they can again finalize the plan. Secondly, at the beginning of the year the outlook on credit outlook continues to be weak. Typically the first quarter is weak for banks, and also given that last year also the overall pickup was much sluggish than what was expected. So banks would want to time it more opportune, I mean at a better opportunity. So these are some factors which are playing. But yes, overall definitely the quantum is huge, but that is eligibility. We'll have to look at the fact that only banks which are running huge ALM gaps would want to tap into that, not the entire system.
Abhishek, if we look at what bankers are telling me, they don't see credit picking up for the next 2 to 3 quarters. So do we expect infra bonds, will not see a lot of demand again in FY16? Because this is in line with what the bankers are telling, that they don't see a lot of credit demand coming in. So they see demand only from refinancing or working capital. So if there is no brownfield or greenfield project coming on the block, they will once again not go ahead and raise money via this medium.
Right. I mean, if you see, the issuances have been around at about 8.5 to 9.5% sort of a coupon so far. If you look at it, I mean, banks would shy away from locking a 7-year paper at that rates if they don't have real visibility of passing on that in terms of credit offtake. So first 2 quarters are likely to be sluggish even in our expectation. But I think as we move into second half of the year, there would be some action. But I think we'll see some bit of action even after the current rate cut, because structurally the need remains. Many of the banks, given that the incremental lending has been towards mortgage and infra disbursals, the gaps have been widening for the public sector banks. So the need for these infra bonds would remain. That won't come down. But the point is, it might be timed slightly better when they have more visibility on rates being stable.
Right. So despite this, what is your target for FY16? What is your estimate? How many banks will go ahead and raise? What sort of quantum are you expecting?
So see, this year, as I said, I think so far about say 220 billion INR was picked up. We expect at least north of 300 to 350, around that range should be there. Of course, the eligibility, as you pointed out, is about 3.5 trillion INR this year. But many of the bigger banks are better placed on the ALM front, so they might not really tap into the full eligibility. They might pick up a little bit just to test waters, or just where they see an opportunity. But I think the quantum should be higher than what it was so far for FY15.
All right, Saloni, thanks for bringing us that story. Abhishek, thank you so much for your insights and the call from India ratings on infrastructure bonds. A slow pickup there. Quick mention of the flash at the bottom of the screen, a net loss of a whopping 100 crores coming in for National Fertilizer stock, taking it on the chin just like TTK did just a few minutes ago. 7% down for NFL.